This is CBC Vancouver News.
Terrifying scenes in Surrey after a fiery explosion at a house. Thousands are without power tonight as an atmospheric river continues to pummel the province. And bidding goodbye to an Olympic bid, why the BC government says it won't support Vancouver 2030. Good evening and thanks for joining us. Dan is away this week. I'm Michelle Ghoussoub. We begin with breaking news tonight in what appears to be a massive explosion at a house in Surrey. It happened at a home at the end of a cul-de-sac near Iona Place and 123A Street. A neighbor tells CBC they heard a loud explosion around 9 p.m., so strong that it shook the windows of their home. And that was followed by several smaller explosions. Firefighters were on the scene within minutes. At this point, we still do not know if anyone was inside that house or if there are any injuries. And the cause of the explosion is also unknown at this time. We'll continue to bring you details as they come, and we'll have updated information on our website, cbc.ca/BC. Well, the wet weather we've been waiting for is here. An atmospheric river has been pummeling the south coast, and tonight over 2,000 people are still without power across the province, with warnings that winds could gust up to 80 kilometers per hour. BC Hydro now saying they will work through the night and into tomorrow morning to restore power to as many people as possible. But they warn they're expecting more outages as the windy conditions continue. This atmospheric river is the same kind of system that caused catastrophic damage around this time last year. But Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth is assuring people this storm will not be as severe.
What we are told is that this is pretty standard kind of rain that we normally get this time of year. The scale, if you're using the U.S. Scale, this is what's classed as a 2. The one from last year was classed as a 4.
Farnworth says some of the rain the South Coast saw earlier has helped prepare the soil for this precipitation, reducing the risk of massive flooding. That said, residents across BC are always encouraged to have an emergency kit prepared just in case. And people in low-lying areas are also urged to move equipment and other assets to high ground where possible. Now for more on the devastating floods from a year ago, a new Senate report is calling on Ottawa to step up and work with BC's provincial and local governments on flood risk. As Janella Hamilton reports, the hope is that this new plan will provide immediate help for those still reeling from last year's devastating floods.
Almost 1 year after last year's floods destroyed 1,000 farms and 2.5 million livestock, poultry farmer Dave Martins is still without chickens.
I want to be positive, but we are hurting and there's a lot of stress.
Martins, who lives in Abbotsford's Sumas Prairie, says there has not been enough support from the provincial government.
The Disaster Relief Fund has been a bit of a joke. Many people have not qualified. So the only way we're fixing these places up is through the kindness of others or bank loans.
The mayor of Abbotsford says some damages have been repaired, but more money is needed from the province to upgrade flood mitigation infrastructure because the city can't afford it otherwise.
We would prefer to decouple a new pump station on the Sumas River to replace the floodgates. That is an $800 million bill. And I actually, when we delivered that in June, I would have thought by now we would have had an answer.
A new federal Senate report outlines the disastrous effects of last November's flooding and the lack of immediate support from a provincial and federal level.
Our recommendation is that the federal government, which has the deepest pockets, step up to make sure that those funds are in place to get that infrastructure back up to snuff.
There's bridges that are still out. There's a repair on Cole Road where the dike basically blew out, and that's where a lot of our water came from.
The report also recommends the Canadian and U.S. governments work together to address the risk created by the Nooksack River in Washington.
The river goes where the river goes, and it doesn't care where human beings drew the line. So we need to make sure that when we work on mitigation on that river basin, that everybody who's affected is at the table.
Senator Simmons says a government response is expected next week, which Martins hopes will streamline much-needed financial aid for those still struggling to rebuild their homes and their livelihoods.
You know, when I wake up in the middle of the night and think my hand is hanging in water and I'm on the second floor of my house, you know, more needs to be done.
Tackling a nightmarish event with action. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
A bid to bring the 2030 Olympics to Vancouver is up in the air tonight. The BC government says it is not supporting the Indigenous-led bid. The province had been reviewing the bid for more than a year and says the cost, which would be in the billions, is just too high. But as Mira Baines reports, the decision has some calling the government's commitment to reconciliation into question.
High hopes for an Indigenous-led bid for the 2030 Olympic and Paralympic Games fizzled today. The bid by 4 host nations, Lil'wat, Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh, is facing collapsing support.
Ultimately, we came to the decision to not support a 2030 bid at this time.
Minister of Tourism Lisa Baer says the hard costs for BC's involvement in the 2030 Olympic bid are about $1.2 billion.
And government had to take a look at that bid and weigh it, its costs, its risks, its potential benefits against government priorities like healthcare, like public safety, like investing in the cost of living.
Vancouver.
She says BC has already committed to hosting the 2026 FIFA World Cup and the 2025 Invictus Games. However, Baer says the costs of the bid would jeopardize the government's ability to deal with pressures facing the province. The chief of the Musqueam First Nation says it had wanted to hold a meeting with David Eby, soon to be premier, and the new mayor of Vancouver to talk about any concerns with the bid.
Upset with the news, but more really upset with a lack of respect that the provincial government showed to our community and to the host nations. This kind of sidetracking kind of hit us with a left hook.
The federal minister of sport says the ministry will continue working with all parties on other sporting opportunities. In a statement, Minister Pascal Saint-Onge said this bid could have set an important and groundbreaking precedent for future games in terms of reconciliation, sustainability, and inclusivity. The opposition BC Liberals also pointed to the province's move as a lost opportunity.
It doesn't really reflect a government that actually practices what it preaches when it comes to reconciliation. The economic opportunities for First Nations and for all British Columbians with this Olympic bid are significant.
The municipalities of Vancouver and Whistler have both said they're disappointed with the decision. The 4 host nations, the Canadian Olympic Committee and the Canadian Paralympic Committee will be holding a news conference Friday. Mira Baines, CBC News, Victoria.
Well, we finally learned when BC NDP leader David Eby will officially be named Premier of this province. Eby will be sworn in on November 18th. BC Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin met with Premier John Horgan and accepted his advice that David Eby become the next Premier. Horgan revealed plans to retire after undergoing treatment for throat cancer. Eby has been pushing to be sworn in during this current sitting of the government, which ends next month. The latest census data shows how Canada has been attracting immigrants from all over the world, including many here to BC. And much of the immigration in the last 5 years has come from India. Saurabh Sandhu spoke to some recent arrivals about what motivated them to choose Canada as their new home.
Deepti and Vishal came to Canada from India 4 years ago. They both left behind well-earning IT jobs in a metropolitan city in search of a better life and a more rewarding career.
We say that it is a 9-to-5 job, but it used to extend and we used to work till 10 o'clock in the night and it was a very normal thing to do.
But it was not just the work-life balance that attracted the couple to Canada.
Your affordability definitely increases here rather than like in what you can afford in India.
From 2016 to 2021, Canada drew maximum immigrants from India at 18.6%, followed by Philippines and China. 90% of the new immigrants chose to settle in a bigger city with population of more than 100,000 people, with Toronto, Montreal and Vancouver topping the list. Shivinder Kang immigrated to Canada in 2014 from India, where he had a secure government job. He was initially reluctant to give it up. Returning to the country in 2016, things did not go as expected, and so he returned to Canada in 2019 for good.
And I drew the line, told my family, we got to go back, we got to start again and live the life that we were destined to live.
According to the latest census data, immigrants now make 29% of the BC's population. That's higher than the national average of 23%. A big number of the new immigrants to Canada in last few years have been the international students.
They do not see a bright career in their home country, right? So they see that rather than studying here and then finding no job, so struggling for a couple of years, why don't we just start our careers back here in Canada, and then we can grow our careers over there.
However, when it came to Vancouver, climate was a big factor for many of the immigrants.
So this is the best place to be in, like if you say like Canada's like a tropical place, I can say.
Like I always say, you don't have to shovel water. People love to call Vancouver a rainforest. I don't mind the rain.
For people like Shivinder, coming to Canada has resulted in new confidence.
It's the acceptance of an immigrant in the society which makes the transition easier.
Sohrab Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver.
A video has surfaced on social media showing the moments before and after Vancouver Police shot an Indigenous man with a beanbag gun in late August on the downtown east side. Following this incident, police say Chris Amiot was taken into custody, went into distress and died. And a warning, some viewers may find this video disturbing. The 3.5-minute clip shows Amiot naked and pouring what appears to be milk over his head. Some text appears on the screen from the poster. Witnesses say Amiot was in distress from a bear mace attack and was attempting to relieve the burning sensation by removing his clothes and dousing himself in milk. Police attend and approach Amiot, who walks away. An officer points a long gun towards Amiot, who then falls to the ground. Amiot's cousin told CBC she's grateful the video exists because it answers a lot of questions about what happened to the 42-year-old father of 8 in his last moments.
You know, it's one thing to read statements that were collected by Vandu and the Pivot Legal Society from witnesses that day, but when I came across it, it brought a lot of shame. You know, there was no dignity for him in it. And you could see the panic. You could see the panic in his actions, and he was afraid, you know, and he was alone.
The Independent Investigations Office, meanwhile, says until CBC shared the video with them Thursday morning, they had no knowledge of its existence.
That type of video helps us corroborate or not corroborate some other statements that we have received about how the individual was acting and what he was doing prior to the arrival of police.
McDonald says those facts are relevant to determining whether or not the force that was used by police in this case was appropriate or not. The Vancouver Police Department has not commented on the video. A woman who returned to Canada this week after marrying an ISIS fighter and spending years in detention in Syria was released on bail today. A provincial court judge in Chilliwack ordered Kimberly Pullman's release on a strict set of conditions, including a promise to take counseling aimed at countering violent extremism. Pullman was arrested after landing in Montreal yesterday morning. She spent 3 years in a detention camp for families of ISIS fighters in northern Syria. She traveled there in 2015 after marrying an ISIS fighter she met online. The Crown is seeking a peace bond against Pullman under a section of the Criminal Code of Canada that is intended to keep people from supporting terrorist activity. Well, new documents show Canada's civilian spy service considers whether First Nations activists supporting Wet'suwet'en blockades should be considered terrorists. The declassified documents show starting in early 2020, CSIS assessed whether Indigenous activists who disrupted trains should be classified as a terrorist threat. The decision would have considered them a threat alongside the likes of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But CSIS eventually decided the label wouldn't meet legal challenges after probing the issue in secret. Vancouver police have shared photos of a man they suspect assaulted a taxi driver in August. Police say the assault happened after the driver picked up a man near the commercial Broadway SkyTrain station. The suspect assaulted the driver while inside the taxi, leaving him with serious injuries before fleeing the scene. VPD say they have been unable to identify the suspect and are now asking for your help. Well, Vancouver has joined the ranks of international culinary destinations. For the first time tonight, the Michelin Guide awarded 8 local restaurants with a coveted star. The big reveal took place at the Vancouver Convention Centre earlier tonight. 8 restaurants received a Michelin star, 12 received a Bib Gourmand designation, that's a category for less pricey restaurants. The decisions were made after anonymous inspectors flew into Vancouver to surreptitiously visit restaurants over the span of several weeks. And for a full list of restaurants on the list, visit our website. Well, the wait is over. After 7 straight losses to start the season, the Canucks have finally won a game.
Carries in, making some moves, puts one in front, Pettersson scores! And then he takes
It was a back-and-forth affair between the Kraken and Canucks. Seattle pulled their goalie late, and Vancouver potted an empty netter to go up by 2. But then the Kraken clawed back and had Canucks fans on their heels until the very end. The win is also number 600 for coach Bruce Boudreau. Vancouver is back in town to play the Penguins tomorrow.
That's kind of what people recognize as your good flying broom.
Well, Halloween is just a few days away, and broom makers on Granville Island say their sweepers are flying off the shelves. That story when we return. Thanks for watching our commercial-free live stream. A supportive and caring touch is essential for the development of premature babies. New technology at the Montreal Children's Hospital is aiming to help with that. The hospital is monitoring the baby's vital signs using wireless equipment, allowing more cuddles for those who love them. John Gala explains.
When you were pregnant, you could do everything, and you try to do everything for a baby. When he's
Nathalie Nicolas is still recovering from her preterm birth. Her baby boy was born at 25 weeks, weighing just 600 grams. He's been in the hospital 3 months now.
When you have a baby in the intensive care unit, it's quite impressive. You enter in the room, you see your baby with all these wires. It's like a wave of what's going on, what's happening with my baby.
At the Montreal Children's Hospital, 900 newborns and preemies rely on vital sign monitors each year.
All the wires, it gets in the toes, it's always in the way. And it's so many wires for such a small baby. So.
But thanks to the Smart Hospital project, tiny infants can cuddle with mom and dad.
This new technology goal is to eliminate the wires.
Guilherme Santana is one of 3 researchers who are part of this study, testing new sensors that work using Bluetooth technology.
When the baby comes to the unit, the only thing you're going to place is one sensor on the foot and one sensor on the chest. And those 2 sensors will send the same information to the monitor, and as you can see, there's no wire.
It makes it easier to dress your baby, it makes it easier to feel a bit more normal.
And that touch is important.
We're going to improve the bonding between the parents and the baby. They'll be able to hold the babies much more often, do skin to skin, which has been proved to improve outcome.
The team at the Children's says it will continue testing the sensors in the NICU and soon in other areas of the hospital as well. Eventually, parents may even be able to use them at home.
Ultimate goal is that might help babies go home earlier.
Giving parents like Nicolas more time for cuddles. John Ngala, CBC News, Montreal.
Well, Halloween is just around the corner, and for the broom makers on Granville Island, that means business is booming. Their handcrafted sweepers look extra witchy and are in big demand for folks looking for spooky Halloween costumes. Let's take a look.
I make handcrafted brooms. It's an old tradition that originally goes back to the Shakers on the East Coast. So we build them in the Shaker tradition, but it's something I just grew up with and learned from my parents. My sister and I have had this shop for 12 and a half years, and that's how long we've run our own business. But before that, I grew up in a broom shop, and I was pretty much always just either playing in the shop or helping in some way as a kid. It really starts with both the fiber and the handle separately. So we have to sort the fiber to different sizes and qualities. We have to soak it in hot water so that we can work with it. And then as far as the handle goes, it's prepping the handle, getting it ready, some sanding, oiling type work. And then once those two things are ready, we can actually build the broom. Basically with that, it's just a matter of pulling very tightly, wrapping it on in layers, and weaving that top stem up the handle. The weave is both decorative and kind of practical because it keeps those stems intact on the fiber, so the fiber's held together by our own binding as well as just the way it grows. There's a lot of folklore about brooms being good luck in association with weddings and housewarmings. In North America, a key one would be during slavery. People who were slaves weren't allowed to marry, and so they would jump the broom as kind of an informal, symbolic way to recognize that coming together. So that is often still used today to kind of pay respects to your ancestors. So these brooms are probably our witchiest, partly because they're the old style, so they have the round untrimmed ends, and that's kind of what people recognize as your good flying broom. And there's a variety of woods here, but usually just a little bit of that interesting crookedness, features like this one has, just make them a little more spooky and interesting.
Here's a live shot of the Georgia Viaduct. Kuljeet will have your full forecast next.
It's autumn, and the trees in the city look beautiful. Mind you, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and for some folks in the 4000 block West 14th, these chestnut trees hold nothing but problems.
Trees are absolutely beautiful, and there's no problem with that, but I wish they'd trim them.
What,
Yeah, you bring it down. The speed that one of those suckers is falling at, when it comes from that kind of height, is going to do serious injury to someone.
Have you been conked, as they say?
I haven't. My children have.
Well, to most people, as far as with the cars and everything, the chestnuts drop off, and you can hear them banging on the cars all night long. I don't know if they dent them or not. And of course, there's quite a mess, and then they have to clear the streets and the sidewalks, and it's a nuisance walking along. You almost roll your ankles on them.
But where some see a problem, others find a solution. Vic Henderson has to spend some time sweeping up the chestnuts, but then he puts them to use.
It's a little noisy.
That's okay.
No, I put my earmuffs on.
Henderson mulches the nuts, turning them into fertilizer.
This is about my second year, and the first year it was really good. My raspberries along there, they really produced a lot more than they had in the past.
Henderson is aware of the neighborhood chestnut controversy, but says it's just a matter of how you look at it. Now, have you ever been conked?
Oh, the odd time I'd get come down a bit.
And you seem to still be among the living, so
yeah, they do. Only I felt it, but it didn't really hurt. You know.
We asked the Parks Board if they had any plans to prune the trees. They said no. Pruning will only result in more chestnuts next year. And if the neighbors wait another 10 days, most of the nuts will be off the trees. We also asked the local postie, who has to walk under these trees every day, to put the problem in perspective.
On a scale from 1 to 10, if a vicious dog is a 10, how does a chestnut rate?
Probably a 1 or a half or something like that.
Thanks.
Paul Heaney, CBC News, Vancouver.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
On November 9th, join CBC British Columbia's Michelle Elliott at a free online UBC alumni discussion about decolonizing arts and culture. Register today at alumni.ubc.ca. And never miss an episode of your favorite CBC drama or comedy again with the free CBC Gem app. Check it out at gem.cbc.ca.
The weather update is brought to you by Direct Buy Furnace, installing the most reliable heating and cooling brand. It's hard to stop a train.
Kuljeet Kaila joins us now for a look at the weather. Conditions today affecting a lot of people across the province. So what can people expect for the coming days?
A little bit more of the same, a bit of a break, and then a second system rolling in time for the weekend. Now, what we saw today was the tail end of this first weather system that's come in, which is a frontal system that came in from the Alaska Gulf Coast and across to the central coast, the north coast, central, the south coast mostly. But inside British Columbia and like the Caribou region still remain relatively dry, and that's going to continue that trend. In Vancouver and across the Lower Mainland, here's what the tallies were for total rainfall for today. We got up to 45 millimeters here in Vancouver. In Coquitlam, just a little bit more, not so much in the Fraser Valley, and for Greater Victoria, they're doing okay. 15 millimeters is what they got, but they will be expecting some more rain for tomorrow for the island as well as for Port Hardy. 10 degrees there tomorrow. 12 and raining in Kelowna, but still, like I said, Caribou region still staying relatively dry for Prince George and Williams Lake. Not only that, some of our seasonal temperatures still above average in some of these areas, including Prince George. Today's high was 9 degrees, and the seasonal around this time of year is 6. That's not going to last very long. Things will start to cool down province-wide. For the south coast, in the meantime, the rain will continue for tonight with some winds 50 kilometers an hour overnight. And then for Friday, a bit of a break. Then Saturday comes in that system in the afternoon, stays overnight and into Sunday. So lots of rain coming for the weekend. About 90 millimeters expected for the weekend. A bit drier for Halloween Monday for the costumes out there. And then Tuesday and Wednesday will be rain-free. Then we're back to the rain towards the end of next week. Michelle?
Okay, and we will continue tracking conditions as they come. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And that is your late news for Thursday. Thank you for joining us tonight. For news anytime, visit our website, cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is on the early edition on CBC Radio 1. That starts tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. Good night.